Okay, resuming. Sorry, I was recording earlier and the video cut off because of storage, but I moved the file again, and I should be fine for very while, a good while, like a good few years. So we'll be discussing Annelida, which are segmented worms. They are coelomates with bodies composed of a series of fused rings. Most are aquatic, and and some live in soil. They can be divided into two major clades, the Arantia and the Sedentaria. Arantians, there are most members of Arantia are mobile marine predators or grazers, and these look frightening. Many have a paddle-like or ridge-like structures called parapodia. So it's these right here. This is the parapodia right here. Well, that's too thick. Let me do like one. Okay, so why? Oh, that's way too thin. Let's do five. These are parapodia. And they are present on each body segment, but they are not unique to this clade. And each parapodium has these bristles called chaetae. Chaetae are spiky and they're made of chitin. So here's a zoomed up portion of the parapodia, which is right here, and the chaetae is the hair-like structures. So the bobbit worm, aquatic ambush predator found on the ocean floor and attacks any of its prey with its five antennae when are stimulated, and inject the toxin, which kills it, and our average size is about 1 meter, so about 3 feet, but can get bigger. So pretty cool, right? And they're sedentarians. Sedentarians tend to be less mobile. Keyword sedentary. So they're less mobile than our little aratarians. And some species burrow into the substrate while others live in protective tubes, such as the Christmas tree worm. Each worm has two brightly colored crowns, and these crowns are composed of radioles, which are hair-like appendages which are used for gas exchange and to capture prey. And the colorful crowns of these worms are visible, but most of their bodies are anchored in burrows that they bore into live coral. So inside this hollow coral, there's a worm, but in this worm, it has little appendages, hair-like appendages called crowns, which are made of radioles, and it's used for capturing prey and gas exchange. And we're going to go to the nasty part, leeches. So leeches are sedentary and are parasites. Most species of leeches are predators of invertebrates and secretes anesthetic to numb. So once they rip your skin and start sucking, they secrete anesthetic to make you feel, less, so you won't feel a thing. And they also secrete another chemical called hirudin, which prevent from blood coagulating. Because once there's a rupture in a blood vessel, like the coagulation cascade immediately happens. But of course, you don't want the coagulation cascade to achieve its job, which is sealing the breach that the leech has made, so it releases a chemical to prevent coagulating, so it can keep a continuous flow of blood. Earthworms, and earthworms are pretty cool. They help recycle nutrients in the soil, and they are hermaphrodites but cross-fertilize sometimes and can reproduce asexually. There's a collection of nerves called the ganglia. Like I said, it's a kind of like a brain, but not really, just a mass of nerves. There's the mouth, and it runs down, and it also runs ventrally, I think. Yeah, ventrally. I think it's the same thing. They also have longitudinal and circular muscle, which means that earthworms have more coordinated movements than other worms, like the nematoda. I believe the nematoda have only longitudinal muscles, which means can only move a certain direction or a certain plane. Their segments are divided by septum, and They have a closed circulatory system, so they're kind of cool. They have vessels. They do have chytae, which are used to adhering to their mate during sexual reproduction, and they have a clitellum, which is also used in sexual reproduction. The metaphridium is a pore outside of the body, and it discharges wastes outside. So it's pretty cool too. Ecdysozoans are covered by a tough coat called a cuticle, and the cuticle is shed or molted through a process called ecdysis. The two largest phyla are nematodes and arthropods. So nematodes are roundworms, and they're found in most aquatic habitats. They have an alimentary canal which has a mouth to anus, and it of course is covered by a cuticle, a tough exoskeleton. So they lack a circulatory system. So body wall muscles are longitudinal, and it produces a thrashing motion. The pseudocoelomate, so that means they have fake coelums or fake body cavities. They do have a body cavities, but it's not entirely surrounded by ectoderm. I mean, not ectoderm, endoderm. And then there's heartworms, endoparasites that live 5 to 7 years inside of a canid or a dog. And adult female heartworms living in an affected canid can produce microscopic baby worms called microfilaria and circulate in the bloodstream. And here we have another type of nematode, which signals from a larvae promote parenchyma cells in the roots to become multinucleated, which is used as a meal. So the larvae would eat on the multinucleated cells, and they will grow into adults. And the surrounding tissue root gives rise to a gall in which developing juveniles are embedded. That's kind of freaky. Another worm that does almost the same thing, well, not entirely, but it stimulates something, is the pork worm, Trichinella spiralis, which live up to 40 years in humans. God dang. So regulates the expression of specific muscle cell genes to make the genes more elastic for the nematode to live in. So it stimulates the host blood vessels to supply the worm. So it stimulates the vascular system into growing new blood vessels at the site of the nematode or this pork worm to supply it with nutrients and oxygen and all that kind of good stuff. And here we have these, I'm not saying that, elegans, which is a perfect animal that we use for studies. So they're either male or hermaphroditic. There are no females, and they're studied extensively with results that are applicable to humans. So they're a very popular model system. In other words, they're just lab rats. And it exhibits behavioral responses to nicotine that parallel those of mammals. And it uses and are used to identify the functions of genes implicated in Alzheimer's disease. So some species are important parasites. Yes, there are some parasites, but many are free living in moist soil and aquatic habitats. And some are good, like our earthworms and our lab rats to find new medicines and for the sake of science. And science is cool. Now we'll be going over through arthropods. So arthropods estimate they're about a billion, 10 to the 18th power or something like that. Arthropods living on the earth. More than 1 million species have been described. So they're found on all habitats. So where did these arthropods come from? Well, their body plan dates to the Cambrian explosions. They have a segmented body and hard exoskeleton and jointed appendages. Early arthropods show little variation from segment to segment. So let's talk about their origins for a bit. So the evolution of their exoskeleton allowed arthropods to colonize land because this helped prevent arthropods from desiccating, meaning from drying up, from losing their moisture. And it also provided the support without the reliance of the buoyancy of water. You know, they could move, because whales, for example, whales are huge and they rely the buoyancy of water. They are allowed to float to support their weight, and that's how whales move. They're so huge. If you put a whale on the land, they're pretty much helpless. But once you put an arthropod on land, they can move a bit. It provides support without the reliance of the buoyancy of water. So here is our arthropod. Here we have the head, thorax, and tail, the genital region, some receptors, the antennae, and the pincers for defenses. So the general characteristics of arthropods, completely covered by a cuticle, which is a cuticle. Here we have a cicada. And some arthropods have modified functions, have modified appendages for functions such as walking, feeding, and sensory reception, reproduction, and defense. So it's completely covered by a cuticle, and the exoskeleton made of layers of protein and the polysaccharide chitin. They have eyes and olfactory receptors and antennae that function in touch and smell. They have an open circulatory system, which means that their whole body, their whole organs are surrounded by their blood. There's no blood vessels. Yes, basically that's what I said. They have a variety of organs that specialize in gas exchange. So they have tracheae, which are little holes right here. And these tracheae suck up the air, which leads to tracheals. Actually, no, I said that wrong. The spiracles, these are the spiracles, lead to tracheae, and those tracheoles, and then the tracheae leads to tracheoles and into the air sacs, which gas exchange occurs. That's basically the equivalent of our alveoli. So morphological and molecular evidence suggests that living arthropods consist of three major lineages that diverged early in the phylum's evolution. So there is insects, other crustaceans, myriapods, and chelicerates. Chelicerates, I think I said that right. So chelicerates are sea spiders, horseshoe crabs, scorpions, ticks, mites, and spiders. I hate ticks and spikes and spiders. Actually, spiders are pretty cool, but I hate ticks and mites. They're annoying. So these guys belong to the clade. How do I say that word? Let's see. I'm gonna try to Google that. I forgot how to pronounce that word. Find it. Chelicerae. Okay. Chelicerae. Chelicerates, or Caesalarata, are named or claw-feeding appendages called Caesalarae. The earliest caesalarates were water scorpions, but most marine species are now extinct, so they're mostly terrestrial now. The modern calariates are arachnids, which include spiders, scorpions, ticks, and mites. So that means they have four appendages on each side. So they have 8 legs in total, or actually 6 pairs of appendages. And the pedipalps, what is the pedipalps? Right here, the pedipalps are like little hands. And the 4 pairs of walking legs and 6 appendages. So gas exchange in spiders occurs in the respiratory organs called the book lungs because they kind of look like books, like the pages of a book. So these are filled with hemolymph, and there's an airspace between the bristles where gas exchange occurs. So if you zoom all the way in, pretend so here is the blood vesicles. The red part is the pickup area for the blood vesicles, and these spaces between is where oxygen is entering, and it fills in it. Oxygen just goes in between the gray space. Gas exchange occurs. It diffuses across red the red layer, and then it becomes oxygenated, and then it becomes, you know, blood, like oxygenated blood. Horseshoe crabs. The fossil record dates back to 300 million years, and today are one of the few living marine caeciliates. They eat worms, clams, and they may also eat algae. Females dig small nests on beach and deposit eggs, then males fertilize the eggs. So here is like a little bunch of males fighting over eggs, and they are used for their blood, which have uh, they help because their blood is extremely sensitive to bacterial spores, and this helps detect biofilms and bacterial spores on medical equipment, where that medical equipment is supposed to be sterilized. So all living myriapods are terrestrial. They have a pair of antennae and have three pairs of appendages modified as mouthparts. So the millipedes, they're really harmless. They have two pairs of legs per trunk segment. And the centipedes are carnivores and have one pair of legs per trunk segment. They have forciples, the sharp claws that include venom glands and paralyze prey for defense. So these guys are relatively harmless, while these guys are the ones you should look out for. So millipedes are kind of cool, centipedes are kind of evil, and they are not insects. Remember, these guys are not insects. Pan crustaceans. They Recent evidence indicates that terrestrial insects are more closely related to crustaceans than myriapods. So some lineages of crustaceans are more closely related to other crustaceans. Together, insects and crustaceans form a clade called pancrustacea. Crustaceans! What's it called? A roly-poly? So many crustaceans live in marine, freshwater, and terrestrial environments, and they have highly specialized appendages. Small crustaceans gas exchange gases through their cuticle. So small crustaceans sometimes have no gills or lungs, and just gas exchange just happens through the cuticle because it's so thin. The layer of cells is so thin, oxygen can just directly diffuse through the cells, and it's pretty easy. There's no use for gills. While larger crustaceans would have gills because there's multiple layers of cells, and there's no way that oxygen is diffusing through the multiple layers of cells. So most crustaceans have separate males and females. Larval barnacles have similars to larval crustaceans, making them a crustacean. So they're considered crustaceans. So barnacles are sessile crustaceans. And we'll be talking about insects, which will be our second to last, and we'll be finished in a few minutes, like another 10 minutes. Everywhere. Insects are everywhere. There's insects in Canada, there's insects in I don't think in Antarctica. I don't know. Maybe. Hexapoda is an enormous clade including insects and other relatives. Insects live in almost every habitat and in fresh water. Flying insects fill the air. They are rare in marine habitats. So insects have evolved flight without sacrificing a pair of walking legs because wings are an extension of the cuticle. So they evolved from a part of the cuticle, so they didn't sacrifice their legs for that. So they kind of won the trade-off with evolution. So here we have a grasshopper. They have an open circulatory system, cerebral ganglia, sensory organs which are located, and a mouth from modified appendages. Here's its appendages and here its mouth parts. It's pretty cool. So insects diversified pretty fast, about 300 million years ago to 200 million years ago. So periods of rapid insect diversification followed radiations of plants on which they fed. So plants and insects evolved together. So as plants diversified, insects also diversified. So the mouth parts of insects in the fossil record indicate that specialized modes of feeding evolved in response to gymnosperm diversification. So that's proof that insects and plants have evolved together. A later insect radiation appears to have been stimulated by the expanse of flowering plants about 100 billion years ago, which is our angiosperms. So many insects undergo metamorphosis. During their development, incomplete metamorphosis is when the young, called nymphs, resemble the adults but are smaller and go through a series of molts until they reach full size. That's incomplete. While complete metamorphosis have a larval stage known as a maggot, grub, or caterpillar. The larval stage looks entirely different from the adult stage, and metamorphosis from larva to adult occurs during the pupal stage. So here is incomplete metamorphosis. So it's like a miniature grasshopper. While a butterfly is this ugly worm, goes through a pupa, becomes a beautiful butterfly. The last one, and thank God, it's a long lecture. Echinodermata, sea stars, brittle stars, sea urchins, sand dollars, and sea lilies, sea cucumbers. They're slow-moving or sessile. A thin epidermis covers the endoskeleton of a hard calcareous plates. Males and females are usually separate, and asexual is external. They have a unique water vascular system. So this helps them move the feet and use the feed as well. So here we have our starfish. This is starfish, and they have a unique water vascular system, which consists of ring canals and radial canals. So water is brushed in. I forgot. I think it's the metapore. I think when water, that's where water walks in. And the water goes through the ring canal into the radial canals, which are these here, are 5 radial canals. These are radial canals right here. And these radial canals push water into the ampulla. The ampulla then propels water out to podium, which kind of like projects, it kind of like gives the starfish a little boost, it's like a water jet, which allows the starfish to move because it's pushing water against the surface. And the tube foot also secretes adhesives and dehiscent chemicals. So the starfoot, the tube foot has a grip on a thing or on a substrate, it releases adhesive chemicals to stick. And when it's about to leave or let go of the substrate, it releases adhesive chemicals to let go. And the cool thing about this is they have repeating organs. So that means that the gonads, you'll find all the organs in every part or every appendage. Yeah, in every little appendage. So you'll find the gonads, the digestive glands, all in these. Echinoderm larvae have bilateral symmetry, but the adults are not truly radial, and the opening of the water vascular system is not central. The madreporite, is only located on one, so when you cut this in half, it is not bilateral symmetrical, so that means there's only one porite in one portion. So they're not truly symmetrical bilaterally. So here is another sea star. Sea stars invert their stomach and digest their prey externally with digestive enzymes, and allows them to eat large prey only. So it allows these sea stars allow them, the body plans of sea stars allows them to eat larger prey, and sea stars can regrow lost arms. So is a quick description. So feel free to pause the video right now. So peripheral tissues have choanocytes, collar cells, flagellate cells that ingest bacteria and tiny food particles. In the area, we discussed this, platyhelminths. And that is it for today.